Hello, PSI2000 students. It's Dr. Conway back for week 6 on Aboriginal peoples, multiple nations under one roof. In this theme of the course, we've been looking at major structural issues that help define the Canadian political landscape. And while Aboriginal peoples are people, they're not a structure per se. The conditions of Aboriginal peoples is something that has been with us for a long time and is a structural problem in Canadian politics because we've never been able to actually address the problem of Aboriginal peoples very well, and we've constantly struggled with that issue over time. And it's important that we understand the conditions that our Aboriginal peoples live in, because it's a recurring problem for all governments and through time. And the Aboriginal peoples, of course, as we often think of them as being one homogeneous block of Aboriginal peoples versus Europeans or other immigrants and settlers, but the Aboriginal communities themselves are very diverse communities. There's the First Nations, there's the Métis, there's the Inuit, and there are some 600 First Nation bands around the country. So the diversity of the Aboriginal communities is significant, and these types of problems they're encountering are the most severe we have of any group in the country, both in terms of education levels, poverty, food, children's health, women's health and protection. We see in the media right now the murdered and disappearing Indigenous women as obviously an absolute shameful state of affairs for any country, but especially a country as wealthy and as developed as Canada. But it's not that these problems haven't been approached, or we haven't tried to solve these problems. But the problems themselves tend to be structurally significant to try to overcome, and we see that throughout many different governments that have tried to come to grips with kind of final approaches to solve these problems. But that's not so easy. The Aboriginal peoples live with the historical legacy of having been the original peoples that lived here, having been displaced from their lands, aggregated into reserves, and treated differently from the rest of the population because of their culture and their lack of familiarity with Western culture. But even as that has changed over the years, the problems remain structurally very difficult to overcome. And recent reports show that, for example, that the Supreme Court has just made a ruling that Canadian governments have systematically underfunded children's health and welfare in reserves, for example. None of that, is overtly done on purpose, but tends to become part of the systematic disenfranchisement of the Aboriginal peoples in the design of our institutions and policy processes. And these problems continue to persist, and they continue to be a very significant problem for Canada, both domestically and how we're perceived internationally. These problems, they're not things that you can blame on in Aboriginal communities, or you can even blame on discrete individuals within government, but rather they're complex problems that our government continues to struggle with on an ongoing basis. So in this week's readings, I want you to become sensitive to the situation that our Aboriginal peoples find themselves in, the diversity of the Aboriginal community. Some reserves do very well, and others are in extreme poverty, particularly those that are isolated in the north. And these problems, we've looked at them multiple times, and we've had royal commissions about them and white papers and so on. You'll see that written in my notes. But the solutions don't seem to be coming very effectively. And so as a people, as a country, we need to try to come up with better approaches to this whole set of problems that we have with the Aboriginal communities. And people say, well, why are we, why is government so involved in this issue? And it's because of the history of the fact that the natives own this land, and the various court rulings have given them the right to land rights and to collective rights. in under our Constitution, then we've gone into a long sequence, a long history of land claims issues, self-governance issues, and so on. But the federal government of Canada, because of our original constitutional acts, have fiduciary responsibility, our legal responsibility for the well-being of the Aboriginal communities. And so the federal government can't just walk away from that, and the provincial governments must deal with it as well, because they have lots of tribal communities within their jurisdiction. But the issues are very difficult, particularly when land claims and land rights of the native communities begin to, for example, come into conflict with natural resource development projects or pipeline projects or things like that. The tensions then become more significant between Aboriginal rights and the economic interests of the broader population. So these issues are never going to be easy to resolve, but clearly there are significant problems that remain, and those problems for any developed country like Canada, we want to progress on helping to solve those problems as much as we can. So in this week, try to read the material on the Aboriginal peoples, develop a fairly sophisticated understanding of the problems that they encounter, and therefore the problems that we encounter as a society and that the federal government deals with on a regular basis. Many would argue not very well. Others would argue that lots of good things have been tried, but the problems have just been so large that that progress has not been adequate. But it's such a complex area of work that most people will spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to bring this to some kind of a resolution. And what you have to realize is that when you're dealing with the Aboriginal communities, part of the difficulty is that you're dealing with quite a diverse group of Aboriginal communities. And so one size doesn't necessarily fit all. And that creates difficulties, particularly with respect to the fact that the federal government continues to have fiduciary responsibility for the Aboriginal communities, dating back from the British Empire. So we need to be sensitive to that issue, because it's one of those issues like Quebec and the French Fact in Canada, like regional diversity and regional economic diversity, and other major structural issues like that are major defining factors in Canadian politics and navigating the political landscape. So next week you have your take-home written exam. Read the instructions when I release them very, very carefully. Make sure that you answer all the sub-questions, that you follow all the instructions in the exam. You have a week to do it. 3 essay questions, maximum 7 pages each. You've got lots of time. Take your time. You get a choice of 3 questions out of, I think, 6 options you have. And proceed with your written exam. Open book at home. Take your time, write it up very carefully, and I look forward to seeing the results. Okay, take care for now, and we'll be back with a video the week after your take-home written exam. Cheers. Bye-bye now.